Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org on the internet. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Kansas and Wichita. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, please visit wichitaliberty.org, subscribe to the email newsletter, like Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, this week on Wichita Liberty TV, Joseph Ashby needs a little introduction for people who listen to talk radio in Wichita. His show is broadcast Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on KQAM, AM 1480 on your radio dial, or you can catch it on the internet and the TuneIn radio app. Here is Joseph Ashby. Joseph Ashby, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Thanks, Bob.
So this week there was another Republican presidential debate, and we're kind of getting close to when things are actually going to start happening. Besides just talking, there's going to be some actual voting. Kind of run down the schedule of what's coming up real quickly. In January 14th, there's a Republican debate in South Carolina. That'll be on Fox Business News. They had one before. Then on February 1st, there we go, the Iowa caucuses. Then on February 6th, a Republican debate in New Hampshire. February 9th, the New Hampshire primary. February 13th, a debate in South Carolina. And then February 20th, the South Carolina primary. Then we've got the Nevada caucuses. And then on March 1st, they call it Super Duper Tuesday, where there's 45% of the delegates that someone needs for a nomination are up for grabs. Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Texas is the big one, I think, that time, Tennessee, Wyoming, and places like that. So we're getting pretty much down to I guess, the brass tacks, we might say. So what's your opinion of how the race is boiling down, Joseph?
I look at the debate and I see probably 5 too many candidates on the main stage at this point. You can sort of make the case for Jeb Bush still being up there, but other than that, it's really four. And if you look at the polls, 4 people are in double digits. Mm-hmm. But it's really, to me, a 3-man race between Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz.
Mm-hmm. Who's the fourth? And is it Bush who's in? Or
I'm saying Ben Carson.
Okay, he's still in double digits
because he's at 12% in the Real Clear Politics average. But since he was at 20 and now he's
trending
at 12,
downwards.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's hard to believe that suddenly people who were on him and decided not to go with him are going to stampede back to him.
And some of the candidates that were on the undercard debate, I think they're like at 0.2%. So that's 1 out of every 500 people sampled indicate a preference for them. So it's really hard to see how some of those people still have the gumption and the budget, I guess, to keep going.
Well, most of them aren't doing it on much of a budget, right? They're doing campaign events. They show up at the undercard debate, and that's all they really need to do. So it's not very expensive. You know, it's a flight here and there, but they have enough money to do that. But if you're looking at, I felt like there was Jeb Bush and Donald Trump mixed it up a lot in this last debate, and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz did. Rand Paul had some good points, and I appreciate his ability to pull the conversation the way that he does. But margin of error, Carly Fiorina, Rand Paul, John Case, they're all being defeated by the margin of error. And so I don't know how you can justify continuing to put them on the stage.
Yeah. And, as a libertarian, I appreciate the voice that Rand Paul brings to the debate, but it doesn't seem his campaign. You know what they say in Kentucky, Joseph? They say, he may not win, but at least he ran. But anyway.
I know you asked the questions, but let me ask you this. Does Ted Cruz clearly is somewhere in between on a lot of these issues between what Rand Paul says and what Marco Rubio says, as far as toppling Middle Eastern dictators or North African dictators on NSA data collection and so forth. to you, is that enough? Does he come far enough in Rand's direction to be appealing to you?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, I would be okay with Cruz as president. I don't know if he's my first pick. Since Mike Pompeo came out about a month ago, I think, in favor of Marco Rubio, endorsing him, and here on Wichita Liberty TV a few weeks ago, he said, I'm going to do everything I can to help Rubio gain the nomination, and then, of course, the presidency. So I've got to take a second look at Rubio, and there's things that are troubling, but he might have a pretty good shot at actually becoming president.
To me, he's the strongest candidate from a talent perspective, right? That if you look at the way he speaks and how he deals with the media, right, how he rephrases questions in a way that you have to, because most of your questions are going to be loaded, and so you have to be able to unwind them and then answer in the way that is more sensible, or certainly favorable to you, if not more if you disagree that it's sensible. So he's very good at that, and I think in that sense, likable. I hate to say this, he looks more Latino than Ted Cruz, right? Ted Cruz has lighter skin, and so there are aspects to him that make him, to me, the strongest general election candidate. I guess my concern, well, with any candidate is, what president are you going to be like? So I guess I'm not really at the phase of, let me try to go for broke on the guy who can win or the gal who can win. But let me still look to see if somebody's better fitting with what I want in a president.
Now, there is quite a controversy about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio's position on a couple issues. Let's hold that for the second segment of today. But in the first segment, I guess it's kind of good that it's not so much centered on Donald Trump anymore. Do you think so? We're getting a better look at the other candidates?
Well, the discussion maybe, the voters are still pretty centered on him outside of Iowa. Pretty much every other state he has a large lead, and certainly nationally he has a large lead.
40% thereabouts nationally, they say. Yeah.
So in the new Mammoth poll, as far as the debates, if you really look at it, the debates, some of the mediators tried to make it Donald Trump said this, Donald Trump said that, responded to Donald Trump this, and that was annoying, and CNN got away from that mostly. But yeah, voter-wise, he's still the center of it. Debate-wise, it's more of a Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz debate.
And the more we see of Trump, I mean, what was the thing about the nuclear triad? He didn't really know that.
Yeah, it was kind of like, well, it's pretty important. We better have somebody smart dealing with that thingy you're talking about over there.
I thought we learned that in high school civics or something, the land-based missiles, sea-based missiles, and then the bombers in the air is our basis for defense. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that it's post-Cold War, that's less common knowledge.
Yeah.
That being said, it was kind of a microcosm of some of the complaints about Trump, is that he's like, well, I'm good at something, so I'm going to be good at this thing. You can trust me, even though I don't actually know.
Trust me, we're going to be great. And the people in there are stupid now. I'm smart. I'm going to make things better, and so forth like that. So, Joseph, let's take a moment off for a commercial break, and when we come back, I want to talk about your take on the Cruz versus Rubio thing on immigration. So, this is the Voice for Liberty with Bob Weeks. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, radio show host Joseph Ashby. I wanted to mention, before we move on, that on the debate schedule, the primary election schedule, that prior to March 15th, all of the primaries award the delegates proportional to the vote, except that many states have a threshold, like maybe 10, 15, or 20%, meaning that, a candidate who gets like 8% of the vote is going to walk away with no delegates. But otherwise, it is proportional until March 15th, and then they start to become winner take all. So it's, if there's not a candidate settled by then, it's really going to be quite a race, I think, in these winner-take-all primary states. Now, there's quite a kerfuffle going on between Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz over what they really feel about immigration. It's spread into the mainstream media. On your radio show, you were talking about Jim Garrity of National Review, very well-known, respected conservative columnist, and it has to do with Ted Cruz. Do we really believe what he said when he proposed an amendment a couple years ago? Or was that simply a legislative tactic, a poison pill, and so forth? What's your take on that, Joseph, and why is this important to Republican voters?
Well, Marco Rubio's primary weakness in the Republican primary is that he was the face of the amnesty bill, the Path to Citizenship bill, known as the Gang of Eight. He was one of the 8 senators. So that was an effort 2 years ago where there were, I think, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and they crafted a plan where there would be a path to citizenship for the people who are presently here illegally or without papers or whatever, contingent upon some things like, building. It was very similar to the Ronald Reagan, the mid-'80s. Ronald Reagan signed, and they called it amnesty then. It also had several steps, and you had to not break the law, and it was multiple years waiting. So very similar in many ways to the Reagan amnesty in the 1980s.
But the main thing is there's a path to citizenship, and that's what they
and instantaneous legalization, right? So to me, that's sort of it. Sort of the citizenship is great. Knowing tomorrow, once the bill is signed, that you're no longer an illegal immigrant because you've been legalized, even though you're not instantaneously a citizen, is a form of amnesty. And then there are penalties, and some people quibble about whether it's amnesty or not. But it was very similar to the legislation in the 1980s that we called amnesty. So that's his main weakness.
Rubio's view is kind of an outlier amongst the Republicans in this. Is that right?
Certainly at the time. Well, it was about half the Senate, half the Republicans in the Senate voted with that bill. Okay. But certainly the voters, right? The political class is kind of scared to death that the Latino population in the United States is getting to be a significant portion of the electorate. It's like 8% now. 20 years from now, it'll be 15 or 20. And so they're saying, look, we can't lose 70-30 among this demographic forever. And so they're trying to make inroads, and this is one of the ways that they think they can.
And that was some of the success of George Bush, that he did appeal to Latino voters, and I think didn't they vote for him, at least to a large extent, in his races?
If he lost by less, right? So 45, I think 44% was the highest percentage that he got of the Latino vote, which is good, strong, very helpful. Of course, he tried to do an amnesty in his second term, but that was after he had won significant Latino votes. Looking back at the voter argument of it, Ronald Reagan, of course, signed the amnesty in '86. The next Republican to run for office was his vice president, so certainly connected to the Reagan administration, and he got beat 70-30 in that election. So a lot of disputing about whether or not a vote for amnesty or a signature on amnesty would help Republicans generally capture more of that vote. And so, yes, he's out of the mainstream of Republican voters who did not want that bill, not necessarily out of the political class mainstream of Republicans. But that's going to be, his voters are the ones he has to impress now, and they are not fans of that. It's going to be his biggest weakness, and it seems apparent to me that their strategy is, the Rubio people are in a room, they're like, okay, how are we going to deal with this? They're going to say, well, look, Trump's got 25 to 40% of the electorate locked up. A lot of other people are not going to vote for them, so they're going to look for somebody else. How are we going to be that somebody else? How are we going to deal with this weakness I have that Ted Cruz would try to take advantage of? And so their strategy is to be like, well, Ted Cruz did almost the same thing. He offered an amendment to the bill that did almost all of the same things. Therefore, don't vote for him over me. I'm more electable, and he's not better on illegal immigration than I was.
But that amendment may not have reflected Ted Cruz's actual position on immigration. Is that correct? Or
it's difficult for me to come to any conclusion. To me, you have to strain so hard. And even if you look at the video where Ted Cruz is talking about it, where he says, hey, look, you want out of the shadows? This amendment does that. You want a form of legalization? This amendment does that. It just doesn't do citizenship. And so to me, I read that or watch that and say, well, this is kind of teasing the Democrats and the Republicans who want to do this as a voter registration drive, right? As a way to impress people that will eventually vote for you, and say, do you really still want to impress them if you know that they can't vote for you in 10 years or 15 years or whatever? And so to me, that was one of those things that you say, let me give you everything you want, except for this little thing that you aren't really talking about, but I know you actually really want. and see if you vote for it. And if you don't vote for it, it'll show that all the talking points that you have aren't true, that you really are just looking for voters.
So he was trying to bring greater transparency, I guess, to the process, try to expose some of the hypocrisy in what others were voting for, something like that? Or?
Yeah, just trying to show that this all was about impressing future voters. And if you took the future voting aspect out of it, they'd never go for it. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of people who say, no, he told all these reporters he was serious about that amendment. But the fact that he didn't grant citizenship doesn't mean the amendment wasn't serious per se, or that he wouldn't have taken that as a compromise in the face of what was going to be certain passage of that bill. It was just that he knew, and he says, I expect this will not pass. And I expect that's too bad, because that would make it much more likely to succeed. And to him, succeed meant giving the Gang of 8 people everything that they want except citizenship, which they claimed wasn't really the purpose.
So there's a lot of nuance, in other words, to...
yeah, it was a legislative tactic that's somewhat nuanced, but it's different. And Jeff Sessions, to me, the smoking gun is who's your most objective source on this? It's got to be Jeff Sessions, because if Rubio had double-crossed him in their effort to derail the bill, then Jeff Sessions would be the first one to be like, yep, he totally double-crossed us. Mm-hmm. But he says, no, he didn't, that he was a staunch opponent of the Gang of 8 bill. And in addition to that, Jeff Sessions voted for all of those amendments that Ted Cruz offered. And if you're looking for credibility on border enforcement and anti-illegal immigration, Jeff Sessions is the most credible of anybody, and he's on Cruz's side on this.
Okay. Well, let's take another moment off for a message from our sponsors. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me, Joseph Ashby of The Joseph Ashby Show. It's got to be tough being George Bush, or I'm sorry, Jeb Bush at this time. Maybe that's part of the problem.
Because he's too much like George Bush.
You know, it's always thought that he would have kind of a easy road to the nomination. At least he thought at first. And now we've got Donald Trump, who's the center of attention, has been for quite a bit of time. I noticed that during the debate, Trump insulted Charles Krauthammer, Steve Hayes, and maybe someone else from Fox News. That doesn't seem to be a wise strategy in a Republican primary, because most Republicans like Fox News, I think.
They do. There is a segment, you know, somebody who's listening to talk radio on a regular basis, which is a large part. I don't know what percentage of the Republican electorate, Republican primary electorate, but a significant one. Mm-hmm. Appreciates Fox News for what it is, wouldn't want to go without it, but understands that it's got a lot of people on staff that used to work for the Bush administration. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of people who subscribe, or ascribe, I should say, to the thought process of the Beltway, which is sort of anti-Tea Party, at least in tactic, if not in some actual policy. And so there are some people that's going to turn off, but then there's a large group of people who think Fox News is too passive in its resistance against the things that most of their commentators say they don't want.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of leads into a question I wanted to ask is about this Republican establishment, because as conservatives who believe in, I guess, a limited government, free market type of approach, a lot of them have problems with the Republican establishment. So who is this establishment, and why are they wrong, or why are they not as good as some of the others?
It's more of an idea or a set of strategies. You know, there are people that you'd be like, this person personifies the Republican establishment.
I think we could say Reince Priebus, the chair of the Republican Party, falls into that category, and maybe some more politicians like John McCain and so forth. To
me, it's a thought process that accepts the conventional wisdom of Washington, D.C., which is, you know, someone like Tim Huelskamp, right, walks up and he's like, this budget's a disaster. We have to go 50 miles, and you're asking me to vote for one block of progress. There's no way I'm going to do that. We have a long way to go. And the establishment mindset is, come on, I gave you a block. Like we go 2 miles the other way. You got to vote for this. And it is this acceptance that the way things have always been done in Washington has to be the frame of reference from which we approach new problems. And there is a new school of thought, maybe it's old school, it's just revitalized, that says we don't have to accept that, and rejects politicians as adhering to the established order or the establishment that says we have to continue to play by those rules.
And I was going to say perhaps that the establishment is more interested in getting reelected than anything
right.
else.
And that's endemic to it. That's just like, don't rock the boat, you're going to screw up, whatever, 2014, 2016, whatever the next election is, whatever the next prize, whether it be the White House, whether it be a majority in the Senate, a supermajority in the Senate, all of those things add up to being timid in your legislative approach, being timid in your rhetorical approach. And another thing that's endemic is just an inability or unwillingness to defend the conservative position in the media. Like if somebody said to John Boehner, are you going to shut the government down? Or Mitch McConnell still does, are you going to shut the government down? He'll be, I'm the one that ends shutdowns. I would never do that. Instead of saying, look, in 2013, we were trying to defend the people against, and talk about the good policies that you were advocating for, trying to get a compromise on, talk about how it was the Democrats who were refusing to compromise, just basically standing up for yourself in a way that Republicans usually don't. And in fact, that someone like Donald Trump always does. Sometimes when he's wrong, he'll defend himself endlessly, and that's very appealing because you see so many people just cede the point to the media narratives.
So on the candidates, I guess the important candidates now, on the anti-establishment side, definitely Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz would be in that side. And then on the establishment side, of course, Jeb Bush was kind of the darling of the establishment. Now, would it be accurate to say that Marco Rubio has kind of assumed that role?
He was elected kind of under the Tea Party banner, and Charlie Crist was far more establishment-type Republican that he defeated.
Switched
parties eventually, sure. So you see how principled some members of the establishment are. So Marco Rubio, in many ways, was looked at as somebody who could toe the line because he was such an appealing politician, so good on the campaign trail and on the stump, that it was hard not to like him.
He was the Speaker of the House in Florida, right? So that is evidence. I mean, you just don't get that by luck.
Right.
A lot of people usually want those jobs. So.
Yeah, so he understands how to work a political system in a way that either Ted Cruz or Tim Huelskamp or whatever can't or just don't want to. Maybe they're not really interested in playing those games because they don't want those leadership positions. The main problem is that people still are just not sure if they can trust Marco Rubio. Conservatives, I should say, some do, but the great bulk of them are like, I watched you go on or listened to you go on Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck and Laura Ingraham and basically spout Chuck Schumer's talking points on amnesty, and it's really hard to get that out of my head. So yes, Marco Rubio has become the most acceptable, most probable establishment favorite because Jeb Bush just doesn't have the charisma. I don't know what happened from the time he was elected as governor until now, but just doesn't have it.
He did have a spark in the debate this week. He challenged Donald Trump and kind of insulted him, or at least challenged him in some ways.
But he did insult him. You can't insult your way to the presidency, you awful, non-serious chaos candidate.
Well, if he had done that several months ago in the earlier debates, he might have a better chance at it than now. But I definitely agree with you, Joseph, that I think he and Carson and some of the others are just on a downward path, I think. And it's really time to think about Trump and Cruz and Rubio, I guess, is the three really that have a viable chance to go forward.
Yeah.
So we've got the Kansas caucus on March 5th, I think it is. That's a Saturday. So people need to be registered voters in the Republican Party if they want to participate. That's a lot of fun. We go down to, did you go to the caucus last time?
Yeah, I did caucus last time.
So it's actually kind of interactive. You go there, you listen to some speeches either by candidates or their representatives, and then you get to vote. Kansas does have a secret ballot, unlike some states, like in Iowa, where you actually go stand in a corner called for the candidates, but that's kind of fun too. But I hope that people will register to vote as Republicans if they want to participate, and then they can do that. So, well, Joseph, we're out of time. So thanks for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV again, and we'll be back again next week with another show. I'm Bob Weeks.